Welcome to the SIWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here again with our guest host, Sergey, and we thought we'd have a bit of a conversation on recruiting, on specifically the resume. So we want to ask or talk about how can we make the hiring process better? And specifically on the resume side, Sergey, you have a lot of experience on the recruiting front. And unfortunately, the resume side is kind of maybe the best out of the worst solutions in that it doesn't do a very good job in filtering candidates. There's all sorts of bias and it relies on people being actually good at articulating themselves. There's a little bit of broken telephone is that I thought I wrote this, but then they interpret it as something that, and like you have to piece it together. But yeah, so why don't we start off a little bit about kind of your journey? How did you, maybe if you can go back to like the first resume that you reviewed, like how did you even know it was good, that you passed it and all that sort of stuff? I don't know if we can do that. I'll put you on the spot. to do that. And then how do you learn the process to actually get good at it? Because eventually it is a skill, almost like a muscle that you have to build.
For sure. You know, it's funny when you say what's the first resume that I reviewed, I would probably have to actually go back to my own when I was
Sure.
when I was actually like around 17 years old, believe it or not. And that's an interesting story because it in many ways ties the roots of like why I'm passionate about recruiting and the whole process is like when I was in a previous conversation, we talked about basketball and like growing up playing and trying to get into college. I built a resume for myself for my basketball sort of resume, right? And that was it was the early days, like 2001 or two, and I would email coaches and send them my basketball resume in the States and actually in Canada too. The problem was in Canada, they didn't give out athletic scholarships to international students, where in the US, obviously they did. So that was the first resume that was the first time I understood, like I actually spent time like understanding the value of a resume, right? And it was one page. My basketball resume was one page because I didn't have much, I wasn't like a very highly awarded or celebrated player.
Sure.
And believe it or not, even back in those days, this was when did I start? Like 1999, 2000, when I started like recording all the games. I could bring my friends to record the games. And we actually put together a tape, like a videotape that I would. So first, I had this whole process. I would email all the coaches. If they were with my resume, if they were interested, I would mail them a package with my tape, right? My highlight tape, which included like a little interview, so they see how I communicate, right? And I kind of went through I pitched myself basically because I wasn't that good.
Yeah.
And I sent it out. I ended up I emailed every single coach in the United States. It was like Division 1, 2, NAIA, junior college, everybody, like over 1,000 coaches. Because I wasn't very good and I was just playing the odds. And about 42 or 3 coaches got back to me and said, yeah, we'd like to see a tape. You're a 6'4", like Bulgarian guy or whatever. We'll take a look at your tape,
Sure.
And then in the tape, I did I put a highlight. I put the stuff that I was good at, like rebounding, and I wasn't athletic. I was a smart player. I was a team player.
Right.
So I basically put a very kind of like almost like, it's crazy when I think about it now, but this is almost like an interactive resume, that unpacks in several stages, right, and builds the excitement, right, and yeah, I got 3 or 4 scholarship offers out of that sort of campaign. The first one I got, I was so happy, and I couldn't believe it. So I basically accepted the first full scholarship I got offered, which was from Lindsey Wilson College. So that was my first resume, my first experience. When did I first review a resume for somebody else? And because I started, even before I got into recruiting, I've been in leadership positions of hiring people. I started a company within 6 months coming out of university, and we hired 5 interns within like 3 weeks. And they worked with us for 3 months to deliver on a big an event that we filled like 60,000 square feet of space, like a event space. Me, my co-founder, which was my college friend, and 5 interns. So those were, and those interns I got from Northwood University, where I went because we had a sports management program, sports entertainment, sports. I talked about it in our previous podcast. So I knew that the students had experience, had passion about events, and we could execute. I knew it because we had done it, right, with events on campus. So this was just a bigger challenge. And it was like, can we fill a 60,000 square foot facility in the middle of really nowhere, between like Bertrand, Michigan is, it's literally like on a highway, right, just off of an exit, and I mean there's an outlet there, there's Frankenmuth and like the Bertrand outlets, which is a tourist draw.
Okay.
But it used to be a hockey rink, and it didn't work out, and somebody, like the new owners, bought it and turned it into a event center, and that was my first job that I also talked about on the last podcast. And like 6 months into that job, I resigned to start my first company, at the time, which was High Impact Marketing. And the GM of the Bertrand Expo Center, who to this day we're in touch and we talk, huge hockey fan, huge fan of Canada, and like, he basically said, well, if you're going to quit to go start a company and make events, might as well make those events at the Bertrand Expo Center. So he's like, we had an office that we weren't using on the second floor, and we hired interns, and we basically ran a company out of that building for like 3 months. And then we didn't break even, once all the at the end. We had over 5,000 people come to that event, and it was incredible. We had like the Detroit Pistons do a camp for kids, and like inflatable, like so much going on there. But so anyways, I kind of always was work, I guess, in a way, was, so yeah, many roles that I've been in a position where I would like interview or hire people, and review resumes, but it didn't really hit for me. It was never a part of a professional, day-to-day life until like 2014. So,
So for that screening process, so if we go back to those 5 interns, right, you probably got more than 5 applications. Like in your first iteration, like how did you decide on those 5? Were there kind of key things? And then how has that screening process evolved? Because obviously you started having more data, more inputs to say, okay, yeah, I've done this before. I picked these people. They were good, they were bad, and then next and next and next. And how do you even learn to screen? Because I talk to folks in HR programs, and they more screen based on like things like how to review like biases and stuff like that, and get apart from that, but not the tactical of like, how do you match these keywords? Like everyone says, you got to filter that, and how do you track of that stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's definitely more of an art. It's a mix of an art and a science for sure. And you get, just like anything you do, you get better at it as you go, right? Like, which is why it's important to start with an open mind. At least now, that's the best advice I would give. Stuff I wish I knew earlier, right? Like, start with an open mind, right? Like, don't assume anything when you look at a resume, and that's more relevant now than ever with all the diversity and inclusion, things going on. And I think I was always more naturally kind of attuned to that, just because of my own personal experience of like living in different countries, like, and always trying to collaborate with people from different walks of life, and very diverse sort of groups. So what I do, and what I have always done, is sort of try to look at a resume holistically, but you really only have maybe about 15 to 30 seconds really to make a read, and the stuff that you're looking for, it depends on the role, which is probably why like the best advice to give anybody is like, actually read the job description. And I know it's tough to customize every application to every job and every company. I get it, because I was there like not too long ago looking for jobs and making those applications, and it's a ton of work. It's frustrating, especially how do you do that, right? I mean, you do it hundreds and thousands of times. You look at the resumes, and then you end up meeting the people.
Sure.
Right. And you spend time with those people, and over time, it's like muscle memory, right? Like, you start connecting certain things you see on a resume with certain outcomes, right? Oh, people that, and this is bias, right? Like, it is bias for sure. However, good companies that ship good products that customers love usually do that because they hire great people.
Sure.
So when companies are successful, right, and that's the benefit of being right. So like there's signs, right? Certain schools people went to, right, and that there's bias there as well. So you always have to question all those things, right? And maybe certain boot camp programs. Maybe what I look at a lot, I'll tell you, is like, even though some like when I look at people that have started their career in other countries and then have transitioned into a life and a career in Canada, like those are things that you look for that also tell you like there's probably some intangible qualities about this person, right? Because I know how difficult it is to move to another country and to start from scratch, right? So and again, those are my biases, right? So there's all these biases. Our interview process is designed to eliminate as many of those, because throughout the process, you meet many different people that all look at things from a bit of a different angle. And then at the end, we score and rank everything. And at the end, we kind of have a decision. So I hope that, I know that's a very kind of high level and kind of loaded answer, but if you want to dive into any of the components of that, because it is really like an art, after a while, like there's so like, and the devil's in the details, like they always say, like
For sure, yeah. So some of the guidance that I give to a lot of the job seeker folks is you mentioned about tailoring the job to the resume to the job description, and I think that yes, it takes work, but it's better than kind of just hoping and praying, right? In the sense that my analogy, I usually compare the resume screening process to the game of bingo, right? Because bingo has like the numbers 1 to 75, and that's the universe of anything and everything that you want to look for, right? But the recruiter specifically wants bingo, like the 25 numbers on the card, right? And if the recruiter says on the job description, I want B5, and then you say 072, okay, well that's not quite a match.
We never get a perfect match.
100%. So it's a matter of as best as you can. So the simple advice that I usually say is take your resume, blank out the bullets, and then grab the job description and say, well, where did you best demonstrate this? And paste it into your resume. And then you're gonna need a paraphrase. You never want to plagiarize because you don't want to complete cut and paste. I know recruiters that when they see that, it's like, yeah, they didn't even bother because it's not a tailored. But if you can adapt what they said to the job description, then that usually fits the job description much more, as you mentioned. So I'm not sure what you think of that process, because to me, I found that very effective, because you're telling the resume, telling the recruiter exactly what they want to hear on the recruiter, or at least as much as you can, the best as you can.
Here's my approach to this, right? Because, and this is coming from trying to study where really study the black hole in recruiting, right? That's what I spent basically 2-3 years trying to understand and study. And recruiting is a funnel, right? Like at the very top of that funnel right now, there's so much going on that out of 200 applications, I guarantee, like, and this is consistent going back to my first days in recruiting. We would have clients sometimes that we would call as an agency, right? And or like we would send them a candidate that we had identified that was interested in the job, maybe had applied, had applied like a year ago but forgot, or 6 months ago but forgot.
Sure.
And we would present that prospect to the client, and they would say, oh, that person applied to our job like 6 months ago, yet they were never contacted. And that's on the other side of the resume wall, right? Is like we can only process that many, like sometimes we get 200-300 applications for let's say a full stack engineer position,
if not
right?
more. Yeah.
I literally have timed myself, and I do it with a high degree of efficiency. Like I said, I spend maybe 30 seconds on each resume. There's certain things that sometimes we see that like eliminate a person right away. For example, we don't currently sponsor at Jobber anyways. We don't sponsor work visas, right? So like if somebody needs an authorization, right, an employer's authorization to work in Canada, that's a quick, right? So we miss a lot of stuff.
Sure.
Right. And sometimes when you dig a little bit deeper under the surface, right, like some of these people that need an authorization maybe to work in Canada, they've actually applied for it. Maybe they're about to get it in a month or so. Maybe they already made plans. Like, so it's complicated because it's a lot falls through the cracks, even through our very best efforts. There are tools out there that make that process that use automation and machine learning and all kinds of things, like Ideal Candidate. There's one. There was a Karen.ai that got acquired. Even in Canada, there's quite a few companies that have built tools for that space, and so it's getting way better. It's getting a lot better, but those tools are still very expensive, right? So like they're usually only accessible to big enterprise companies that hire the same type of role at large scale, right? So it's like it lends itself well to like big data and processing. We're not there. We're not that type of company. I look at every single resume. I try to look at every single resume at Jobber that applies, and there's like hundreds of them every week, right? So it's yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like the technology is advancing and they're trying to fill in the goals, but it's one of those things where, I mean, right now we don't really know what makes for an amazing candidate, right? So they maybe through AI, machine learning, they'll figure out some sort of algorithm, but like it's really through that kind of muscle memory of like, well, yeah, I've recognized this type of person and I saw this resume, I interviewed them, and I caught up with them for lunch and they're doing fantastic. And then this other person where a resume interview and like, oh my gosh, they quit within a month. And then through that process that then you kind of train your own AI, your
That's
NI,
right.
your natural intelligence, right, to figure that out. But yeah, so it sounds like that the technology is trying to catch up. What about things
Yeah.
like video interviews, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, right, video resumes, because you mentioned that you sent like this kind of video reel, that sort of thing. What has been your experience with that? Have you ever contemplated and thought about that? Because I
Yeah.
have my own story on my side.
Absolutely. I mean, there's interview. It's hard to say in it. No, how does it? What's the interview? I think that's the way you say the company name.
Okay.
Interview. It's a video interview platform. It's the
Uh-huh.
biggest company there is, and without saying too much, like it's at the top of the. I think it's at the top of the list of like more innovative applicant tracking systems, let's say, or some sort of a system that can streamline the hiring process, right? But again, and it's a very, I believe video is actually a very big part of solving for the inefficiency of the job description, because really, like, if you look at the means of communication we have today, right, like writing something long and complex on a piece of paper and having somebody read that and then match it to their own complex piece of paper, with a lot of formatting and things that get in the way and biases and all that. So like
Yeah.
a lot gets literally lost in translation between the lines, and video is good for cutting through that. The best thing to cut through that is actually working with the person.
Of course.
Nothing beats that. There's a concept out there, and this is going back to kind of like smart hire and what we were trying to build with our platform. And the concept is that there's sort of like a group think, right? And that in the developer community, reputation is something that is very important, right? If you go to
Okay.
like Stack Overflow, if you go to GitHub, like if you dig into the concept of like open source technologies, and even, I mean, if you look at the history of how the internet came about, right? The internet could have been a very different place and thing today if it wasn't built sort of with an open source kind of approach, right? So what I'm trying to say is that yeah, I lose my train of thought sometimes, and because these things are complex, right? And it's like
Yeah.
rabbit holes, and but
Well, you mentioned is that nothing beats working with the person. So
yeah. So
it,
trust, right?
okay.
Trust is the ultimate thing we're trying to get to,
Yes.
right? Whether it's by resume, which is not a good, nobody, like, people don't trust resumes, right? Because people put lies on their resumes.
Sure.
I mean, let's call them lies or exaggerations, or sometimes I'll tell you for myself, because so when I was looking for a job, I spent about 2 months agonizing over my resume. And it's actually a very interesting thing. Any recruiter that you ask that has spent, that is like have some experience, they hate working on their own resume.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who was a pretty successful startup co-founder with an exit and a CTO, and he said the reason I kept starting companies is because I didn't want to make a resume. Like I hated updating my resume, so I just kept starting companies.
Right.
And this is the problem we have, is that it takes too long for us to build that trust to be able to say, like, because it's really ultimately very simple. If you look at first principles, like what Elon Musk always tries to figure out is like,
Yep.
what do the two sides try to get out of it? Can
Yep.
you do this job? Will you be able to solve the problems that we have, which is why we're hiring for this? Like, you look at it from a product design standpoint. I'm an employer, I'm a hiring manager, I'm a recruiter. I'm trying to fill this. We're trying to solve a problem, some sort of a problem at our company. And you are a person that solves problems. So the problems that you solve and the problems we have need to match. And they need to match not only today, but they need to match. We need to see that they're going to match 6 months from now, 12 months. Like, you're going to continue growing and expanding because that's what like high growth companies are all about. It's not just about what you come in with. It's about what are you 6 months later. Like, really fast scaling companies upskill their talent every 6 to 12 months, right? Every 6 to 12 months, you're taking that, that next step, right? Like, more responsibility, and you're pushing yourself, right? And like, that's kind of how the magic happens.
For sure, and I love how you broke it down to it's just trust. But now that trust is so hard to acquire, like on a whim, through a piece of paper, through a video, that sort of thing. And my kind of experience with the video side is it adds or introduces some efficiencies, but takes out a whole bunch of other and adds more. Because one of the things that we found is you mentioned on your resume screening process, 15 to 30 seconds is how long you have, right? But the problem with watching a video resume is that if it's a 3-minute video, I have to watch it for 3 minutes, right? Like, it's unless you're talking about like the first 15 seconds, right?
I'll tell you a funny concept that, so I was part of this, when I first came to Toronto, I was like really into the whole startup thing because I really didn't experience it in the States. I was working in like manufacturing and like a very, very different world, right? Where the technology was very outdated in a software sense, like like really outdated, but it was a manufacturing thing. So it was a different type of business, right? But, again, lost my train of thought.
We're talking about time, like watching a 3-minute video actually takes 3 minutes.
So
what would be the first 15 seconds? Yeah.
When I came to Canada, I was like really, really fascinated with the startups, and I got into this lean startup machine like weekend program, right? It was like I didn't know anybody in Toronto, and that's a great stuff I wish I knew earlier. I mean, like, I would do that more early on. Like, I would build my network very, very strong in that space, because as soon as I went into that lean startup machine, like environment, I realized like this is what I want to be around. It was just like all this energy of like people that just felt like they could build products and ship them, and like, right, lean startup machine it's based on Eric Ries, right?
Yep.
Based on his work, right? And I mean, so that's when I first started learning sort of about the lean concepts and agile and all that type of stuff. And once you learn that stuff, it opens a new realm of, right, like how things get done, right? Like more collaboratively. So but yeah, we were working. So the project that I ended up bidding on, basically everybody bids, right? Everybody tries to get people on their side. It's a very interesting environment. Within a weekend, you walk away with a business model and a product that, in some cases, by the end of the week, so our product was called the 90-second interview, or it was 90-second interview. And the concept was that, in the first 90 seconds of like meeting somebody, whether or not you want to learn more about that person, basically. And if you don't, it's better to cut off the conversation right there and spend another like 90 seconds giving a little bit of feedback. So within 2 or 3 minutes, you could basically give a candidate more value, because like a lot of the time wasted in recruiting is on interviewing candidates that for whatever reason, they're not bad candidates, but they're just not a fit. They're not a fit, right? Like when we're interviewing 16 people sometimes for one position, like 4 or 5 of those people are amazing. 1 or 2 of those people are incredible. Right. So it's like, that's the level. And when you want to build a company that scales, like, like we're trying to do, or like a lot of companies are trying to do, you aim for those amazing or like exceptional people. And you're never going to get them in every role, but you aim for that. Right. And so that's what I want. And we always say it to candidates, but I think, and also as a candidate, I know it comes across like something like a consolation, prize or something like pity. But a lot of the times it's not the case that it's the candidate, like the person we interviewed and ended up not hiring is not good or not good enough. It's just that somebody else just has such a better fit for that role at that time. I mean, it's really something to see, right? Like how it ends up being. Like you're looking at 4 or 5 people that could do the job, but you're
Sure.
picking the one that can do it the best.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah, it's not whether you're qualified for the role, it's whether you're the most qualified role in that pool. Yeah, and that's one of those things where a lot of people struggle because like I can do the job for sure. Yes, you can, but unfortunately, this person has demonstrated or has indicated they can do it better.
Maybe they've already done it for 3 or 4 years, and
Sure,
they've
yeah.
seen around the corners that you just can't see without that experience.
Yeah.
And they can come in and help us get there faster. And you would be a better person to come along on that ride and absorb some of that, and while also like adding your own whatever, right? But that's not with us, not right now. That's somebody else, right? That's basically. So what I would say to people is like, it's the law of probabilities, and
For sure.
I mean, and that's why like there's are you familiar with like the second choice, like the ranked choice systems? Like they had the mayor race in New York. I follow Andrew Yang's candidacy wherever he goes. I'm a member, honorary member of the Yang gang. I can't be.
Okay.
I love his take on some of the big. He ran for the presidential, right,
Yep.
for the Democratic in the Democratic primary last time around, and he now ran and just conceded the mayor race in New York. But he's he's somebody that, like, sorry again, like I think my brain at this point is just like overheating, and it's like, because you got me talking about like topics that I'm very interested in, but at the same time I've been talking all day, so it's like it just like I get into these rabbit holes.
No worries. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to mention. So one of the reasons why we were exploring in my past role, like video interviews as well, and it's an interesting point where you kind of look at more holistically, where individually on the resumes you might spend 90 seconds on, but you save a whole bunch of time because for a role you might be interviewing 5-10 candidates, like each one for an hour. So if you extend that to kind of those 90 seconds time to 200 people, it might be roughly the same. Yeah, it's basically the kind of the same thing. But I think one of the challenges that we stop is the unfortunate part of bias, right? Because it's one of those things where you value the talkers, the ones that can kind of outwardly present themselves. And communication is important, but in some circumstances, you want the person who can take away and think, right, and about the answer and all that sort of stuff, right? So sometimes when you give a question right on the spot, someone might not be able to articulate it, but the kind of more reserved, the shyer, where they will have a brilliant answer if you gave them 5 minutes, 30 minutes to do it, and they were probably the most well suited for the candidate versus someone who can like talk the talk and not necessarily have the same.
Well, so, you're not. It's a great point. Yeah. You're not making that decision to pass a person only based on their video.
Sure.
The resume has a lot of merit, has a lot of value, right? Combined the two, right? If I can take a 30-second glance at your resume and a 30 or 90-second glance at your video, how you present yourself, how you talk about the topic, like, and just answer maybe 1 or 2 questions that are very, very pointed and direct.
Yep.
Right? Because that's what it comes down to, really. To move fast, you have to be able to solve problems fast. And
I would agree with that. Where at the video interviews as kind of a primary or first kind of interview screening portion, I think is great. For me, I was trying to get rid of the resume altogether. Right? That's what I was trying to do, and unfortunately, the video doesn't really allow for that.
We tried, we tried, right? So our concept that we were building, it was called Wage, right? And it was a decentralized talent marketplace, right? Where basically there was no resumes and there was no interviews. There was basically skills and peers that would verify those skills through a series of conversations. So like we would pair up like a junior software, like a junior JavaScript engineer with a senior engineer, or an intermediate with a senior, or a manager with a team lead. And we would just have them chat for a few minutes and verify a few key skills that we felt like were important for whatever the client was in that case looking for, which most companies look for the same things, like really. And recruiters aren't very well equipped because of we don't have the technical background. Like I in my case, I have some, so that helps me a lot. But most recruiters have none. Like they literally come into recruiting or tech recruiting a lot of times with a passion, which is important. But we're not very good at understanding whether this person can actually do the job, especially until you've built up that muscle memory of like you said, like participating in hiring like a few hundred people and then seeing how that plays out, like seeing who stays, catching up with them a few years later and like, hey, why did you leave that job, right? And like you start learning really what drives and motivates people. And now like you just get to the point faster and you cut through it, because nobody wants to spend their time working in a job that they're not a good fit for and that they don't have a clear sort of, at least a clear enough understanding of like how they're going to progress and advance into whatever it is that they want to accomplish and achieve. And we're more and more moving towards a world where it's the candidate is becoming like a consumer, right? Like they're just consuming another service, which in this case is this job the right job for me? And the companies that are going to produce and deliver the best product of helping talented individuals figure that out are going to win.
For sure.
The competition is only going to get tougher for this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that startup or whatever platform you're building about that kind of decentralized talent market, I think it goes back to that whole concept of trust, right? Because someone trusted the other person and has a belief in them, whether it's founded or not, that they can do the job, right? So it's figuring out that, and I think another concept that someone else was working on, and I think they were fairly successful, is that they found basically smart people to say, hey, you're smart people. Right. And there's that concept of you are the average of the 5 people you hang around with. So chances are all your friends are smart. So we should probably hire them. Right. So it's more kind of that referral base where like I want to get a whole bunch of people to get there. But then it introduces that whole kind of groupthink where like, do I want like the nepotism of that as well? Right.
It really works. I mean, so there's a great book out there called The Google Way, which talks about like some of the management philosophies and practices at Google and how it sort of evolved over time. And Laszlo Block also who was the chief people officer or the chief talent officer at Google for a long time and then left to start his own company. He has this I didn't read it, but I listened to it. It was working or it's a famous book. If you look up Laszlo, you'll see it. But the gist is that bias is, so this idea of groupthink, right? If you have several people meet a candidate or I don't even like saying candidate, just a person, right? Any person, right? If you have 2 people meet over the course of several weeks or like we're doing, or several months, sometimes several years, you get a much better understanding of that person, right? Especially as far as their career goes, right? So we have, like, for example, like, and the best, I think, like ways to eliminate bias is to have several interactions throughout the recruiting process with different people from different backgrounds, like very diverse people, and have them all sort of rank and score and provide feedback in their own terms and sort of and then looking at all of that. And what we do a lot is sometimes we have 40 to 60 minute sessions where we have the 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 people that have met with this, and we dig into and dissect every, like, if there's any kind of doubt, right, that this person can be good at what they're, and we're not looking for perfection, we're just looking for, can they be successful in this job? Nobody's perfect, everybody has gaps, but can we teach and support and provide the resources and what's needed to help them overcome the limitations while really like leaning into their strengths, right? So that's kind of the tricky part, and it takes several interactions. It takes making people very comfortable so they can open up, they can talk about their people. The number one thing I wish I knew earlier is like get comfortable with my weaknesses and be okay to ask people for help.
Yeah.
If I don't like, I have a hard time doing that even to this day. Like with all this stuff, like I'm saying here, when I'm having a problem at work, I'm so hard. I will try everything like before I ask somebody, but now I'm better at that. I literally, as soon as I get stuck, I'm like, it's better to just ask somebody for help
Sure.
because maybe it's just like a little thing that I'm like not paying attention to.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a core skill that a lot of people need to learn is, yeah, be comfortable in not knowing and then being able to say that you don't know and then reaching out for help. That's not a sign of weakness. That's actually a sign of strength where like, why would you spend an hour a day figuring it out when someone can answer in
And
5 minutes? Right?
people love talking about themselves. People love sharing knowledge. It's something that's in our DNA, right?
Yeah.
People love like I'm loving this, right? Like
Mhm.
because I've spent 8 years like banging my head against the wall to figure out all the issues in this wonderful sort of world of recruiting, but it actually helps when you talk about it because you can kind of put it into some sort of a flow that is hard sometimes to get because it's all over the place, right? There's so many
Sure.
moving pieces.
Yeah.
And I think mentorship is something that is going to become so incredibly important. I just look at the amount of young people. Like I think I was telling you before we started recording, I was with a couple of my basketball players that I used to coach, and like mentorship does like really wonders. It's like they say, like, don't give somebody a fish, teach them how to fish, right? Like,
Sure.
don't,
Yeah.
if you give them a fish, you like they'll eat for a day, but if you teach them how to fish, they'll eat, they'll
Forever.
be able to
Yeah.
eat for the rest of their lives, and they
Yeah.
can teach other people how to fish, right? So that's where we have to focus, and that's how we, for example, look at hiring, is that like, how do we make our entire organization like be really tuned into talent attraction, to the candidate experience, onboarding, because it doesn't stop when you like just find the person that can do the job. Now you have to actually help them start doing the job. That's
Sure.
in many ways the toughest part. It's easier to do with people that have more experience, but yeah, there's pitfalls all along the way.
Yeah, that's a whole podcast series on its own. But yeah, so as we kind of close our conversation, so what I kind of took for this is really the hiring process. I mean, there's a whole bunch of challenges. There's kind of that bias in either the presentation of this paper version or a video version or whatever. So if we somehow are kind of minimize that or eliminate it, and part of it is from having a whole bunch of different perspectives. So I'm reminded, I think there was a company where, a small company, but basically everybody was allowed to be part of the interview process, right? They had a time period where like, hey, the new person is going to be hired. We have a couple candidates and everyone come and you can ask them any questions you want, right? So
I'll tell you.
yeah.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to. Yeah.
No, and that kind of is one of the ultimate unbiased, because everyone in the company has a say. Now you're assuming that everyone else in the company thinks slightly differently, and there's a hope that there's a bit of diversity in there, but you never know. So, but part of the core of the hiring process is to have that diversity, minimize bias, and at the end of the day, it all amounts to trust, right?
It's a
You have to be able to trust that person.
you're absolutely, yeah, you've summarized it really excellent. And like what I wanted to add to that is that because the previous company I was working with, and I say this like I say it all the time, like GuruLink, right? It's one of my favorite, most fondest sort of memories of because it was a very different type of environment in the sense of like the most sort of we're really like, it was people were really comfortable with who they are. Like we often joke that we're just a bunch of like misfits that fit perfectly together.
Okay.
People were very sort of safe and comfortable being themselves, and we are. It's interesting because anybody that's ever interviewed at GuruLink, and it's kind of like a legendary, because you end up meeting, sometimes you can meet 10 to 15 people in the span of like a day, or sometimes one or two interviews, and
Okay.
it's a very organic, it's almost like, it's like, I compare it to like almost like a tribe, right? We have a tribe here, and everything kind of like, it's like everything's fine tuned. So like, so any new person coming in this tribe, because we literally, like in our Toronto office, was like an old 3-story building, kind of almost like reminded me of when I was in university, right? And it's like all 15, 20 people, right? And we're basically living together a little bit, right? Like we have a kitchen, we're cooking
Yeah.
together, and that's where you really build those connections, right? And those those things where the sum is better than the parts, right? Like and so culture is incredibly important to that, and you can create, and I can give examples. Like I sometimes I call myself like a culture connoisseur, because like I've been in so many different companies and I've worked with many different companies, and culture is the differentiator. And if it was never more clear than it is now.
Yeah, I think there's an expression that culture eats strategy for lunch or something like that. One of those things, but
breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and dessert. And I'll meet you for an espresso tomorrow morning too, because it'll still keep doing it, because it's real, it's authentic, you can't fake it, right?
Yeah.
And it leaks. It leaks very well, whether it's good or bad, and which is the benefit. If you do it right, it'll leak organically by people talking about it. And that's a force today, combined with social media, that is hard to stop. Once you have a employer brand that is infectious, like Google has, like Shopify has, like Apple has, like where people are lining up and willing to like interview 10 times because they understand that it's not about getting the job on their terms. It's about getting the right job at the right time, when they're ready, when, like all the pieces, like that's where we're trying to get to. And that's a very, like, those are like 0.01% of maybe companies or something like that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And again, it boils down to the fact that you mentioned, well, can they do the job? Right. And is the company even giving me the jobs that I want to be doing is the other counter to that. And once you have that trust in between with as minimal bias or as much diversity as you can to eliminate that bias, and then that kind of is that solution. So hopefully folks are listening into the conversation. We don't have a solution in terms of how to necessarily improve the hiring process, but at least it might spark some ideas and imagination, and hopefully we'll continue the conversation as we learn, because there's a whole bunch of new tech and new platforms and companies coming out. But thanks so much, Sergey, for engaging in the conversation, and hope to have you back for a future episode.
Always a pleasure. And I'm actually, so I'm doing also, I just discovered Twitter Spaces. So I played around with it yesterday. It's pretty incredible. And it was such a good experience that basically I'm going to do like every Wednesday, 5:30 p.m. Eastern. I hope it's okay to, I'm just starting to learn really about how to connect all these platforms. And it's because I think these are important topics. And I had maybe like 15 or 20 people join me on my first like AMA on Twitter Spaces. And it was people from all over the world, Netherlands, Sweden, the US, all over. And they were all interested in tech and innovation, a lot of them in crypto and blockchain, because on Twitter, I'm more into that stuff, because it's stuff that I think the blockchain is a fascinating space. And we can honestly talk one episode about that, because it's one of the technologies that gets overlooked, right? Mm-hmm. When you look at everything that's going on, all the innovation, in terms of taking now more less so than when we were doing it in 2018, but it's an interesting topic.
Sounds good. So hopefully we'll have you back, and then we can talk about blockchain or many other topics as well. So thanks, Sergey,
I'll let you go. Yeah. And I'll get back to my my work. So take care.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Lukidanu, Lukidanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.